Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 8 in our series about additional learning needs with the fabulous Emma Davis from the Better Health Generation. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you.
If
You?
only I'm good. If only I could talk. Um, this week we are talking about great delivery models for additional learning support, a topic that I think you're going to be a touch opinionated about.
Me, opinionated, never.
Because the truth is that there is more than one way to get a learner from A to B.
Yeah,
And their needs have a habit of changing through the program. So, what you put in place on day one, well, you're going to need to test that. So, on day one, we've identified a learner with additional needs. Hopefully, we'll have talked to the learner about what they need
yep,
because, they have an opinion. They know what's worked previously for them. Um, and then we need to test the effectiveness of that. And then we're going to need to change the plan.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, so if we're talking about learners who don't have complex needs, then to draw down the funding, we need to demonstrate additionality. That's the key. So if the support is purely the same amount of support that we're delivering to everybody else, that is not additional and doesn't draw down funding. But the kinds of things that we used to do when I ran an apprenticeship provider would be, arranging for some one-on-one time at the end of a teaching session, um, or where a tutor had two or three learners with very similar needs. You could do a small group session specifically focusing on those needs at the end of a training session. We could arrange for additional observation time to reduce the amount of written work for somebody who struggled with writing,
Yep,
um, or for additional oral questioning, again, to be reducing the writing. So, conversations around what would be the pieces of work where we needed to have it in writing. We were a childcare specialist. So, anyone who's delivered the childcare qualifications will know all about the child development grids.
yep.
Highly tedious, very repetitive, not the most exciting thing in the universe, but nobody's going to oral question their way through those. It's not happening. Um, just not. I was never going to make anybody oral question their way through that. But those are the kind of conversations we need to be having around this is too tedious for us to oral question. This actually we can cover using different assessment methods.
Yeah,
Those additional assessment methods tend to take more staff time, and now we're into the realms of additionality.
yep,
So those are kind of things, additional teaching time for English and maths, signing people up to go to additional specialist classes with English and maths specialists, those are kinds of stuff. Then we get into the sheer volume of stuff that you guys do.
yeah. I mean, to put it in perspective, we've got over 55 clinicians, and they
Okay,
all
so what's your top 10?
neurodiversity is huge.
Okay,
Um,
so what
neuro-
kind of support can you give to learners who are neurodiverse?
Putting in, I mean, most of these are really similar in the respect that a lot of it is about putting strategies in place,
Yeah.
reducing barriers, and giving people techniques to move forward with. And, sometimes you give somebody a technique in week one, they try it for a couple of weeks and it doesn't work for them. And you have to reflect and go back and adapt and find a different way of supporting them, because we're all different. So it is, I mean, our clinicians are amazing. They seem to get it right, and our feedback is absolutely amazing.
But what are the kind of top five issues that,
Mental health is huge. Mental
okay,
health, neurodiversity, struggling with anxiety, huge one, especially when the youngsters going from school to suddenly managing work relationships, education alongside that, and then home lives. The stress of finance, absolutely huge. People who are carers. We've got a lot of carers that are in apprenticeships. I was working with a company who specialise in apprenticeships, actually, and they were saying that they didn't realise, but they did a research project, and they realised that over 60% of their workforce were carers in some shape or form, which is huge, absolutely huge. That responsibility and pressure is absolutely massive. So, in honesty, when you pick the top five, I mean, the resilience and anxiety and neurodiversity and mental health, they are all the top ones, I'd say. Vicarious trauma is huge at the minute. People think that trauma is somebody that's been through something that, seeing something horrific, but actually trauma affects everybody in different ways. It can be somebody chipping away at you. It can be gaslighting at home. It can be a difficult home life. It can be being absolutely terrified to get the bus because they've seen something or heard something in the news. It can be a friend sharing a piece of information with them. Vicarious trauma, huge, that then affects them physically and mentally. Triggers can happen at all periods and times in which in people's lives, and that's where I say to a lot of the training providers, if somebody's suddenly showing a change of behaviour, let's find out what that is, because they might need support. Like, don't put it down to it might not just be the apprenticeship, but if it's impacting the apprenticeship, then you can gain support. Yeah, I mean, it's about being flexible, really, isn't it? The tutors and SENCO team need to be flexible and understanding that people change all the time. Their situation changes. Somebody can wake up one morning and suddenly feel very anxious and have low mood, and that unfortunately is the way the human brain works. So then they suddenly need support. It can be a trigger, it can be trauma, it can be numerous things. I mean, it can be a loss of somebody close to them,
huge
a car
stuff.
crash. It can be, literally, the list goes on. But everybody's trigger is individual, and everybody's need is individual. And our team, everybody that goes through the Spencer profiling that then gets recommended for extra support, then goes to our operations team, where they literally pair them up with the correct clinician that can give them the appropriate support in order to bring them forward and keep them on program and get them through endpoint assessment. And in all honesty, some people, it is the idea of endpoint assessment. The idea of endpoint assessment becomes so overwhelming. The stress,
I'm not surprised,
becomes so incredibly heavy that they build this thing up, and it becomes a massive issue, and it actually causes mental health issues and problems and worries and concerns, however you want to look at them. And that's when they need support.
Because if you've been bludgeoned through school, and let's face it, a lot of people are bludgeoned through school. People will get offended by my use of the term, but the British education system for a lot of people is not a happy time. You are, forced to engage with subjects that you find difficult. The pressure to succeed, all of those messaging of you'll be nothing if you fail.
Yeah.
Even though the system is designed that a significant proportion of learners will fail.
I mean, I don't know about you. I tell my children every day, failure is good. Experiencing failure is good. It pushes you, it drives you to work harder. But not everybody's brought up in that environment,
No. And not everybody's brought up in the environment with informed parents who go, yeah, if you stuff it up, you will get yelled at for stuffing it up. I used to say to my son, I want you to be able to look yourself in the mirror and say you did your absolute best. You tried your hardest. You didn't leave anything on the table. If you can look yourself in the eye in that, then we will cope with the consequences.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there are more than one way to get from A to B and get an education, and schools aren't great at informing people of plan B, C, D, E, F, and G. But we've gone off on one. We've definitely gone off on one. You can tell, two mothers. We went off on one. I want to go back to this issue of neurodiversity. Because it is a buzz term as well as being real.
It is, definitely, yeah.
So I want to understand more about what the trigger is for providers. Is it that they see a learner who has declared that they have neurodiversity on an application form and suddenly gone, oh, we can't cope with that.
The thing
What's the
is, Julia,
trigger?
most people don't even know they're neurodiverse. And I say, I mean, I think all of us have got a neurodiverse in some respect.
I mean, it's just how people's brains work.
It is. We're all different, aren't we? We're all unique, and I think everybody, does things differently. It can be things as simple as, especially neurodiverse. This is a huge thing. Is organisation, aren't managing their time appropriately, don't understand how to, can't quite get everything to fit together. Because actually, it might seem simple to you or I definitely have ways in which I like to organise myself. I'm a list upon list person, but somebody else might find that horrific and use, I don't know, Monday or like an Excel sheet or, whatever they might use. I like pen to paper. That is definitely probably a big downfall. But some people who are neurodiverse have no idea how to even put that down on paper. So the idea of working through a course or an apprenticeship, which is so methodical, a bit like school, is actually so incredibly daunting and scary that it almost paralyzes them.
Yep.
And our job is to take them out of that paralysis and to give them the techniques and remove those barriers and give them a can-do attitude and also build up their confidence, because a lot of it is confidence, being told that the way they're doing things is not right, your method isn't right, the way we do it here is this way. That's in my very humble opinion,
So
is
some
wrong.
of that comes down to, from a provider perspective, the design of the program.
Absolutely.
If you are designing it so that there is only one right or wrong way of doing it, you are creating a barrier that doesn't need to exist.
You're isolating people, and probably a lot of people, because a lot of people that probably, again, probably talking out of term here, but people that go into apprenticeships often are people that don't fit the one size fits all,
Yeah.
School, college, university. They often are a little bit more hands-on. They prefer the practical element, and actually what they don't need is to be streamlined again. What they need is that flexibility, that flexible approach, so that actually you can get the best out of them.
But that's a lot down to program design, how we, every apprenticeship is a body of work. We are preparing people for some endpoint assessment activities.
Yep.
And there is more than one way to get from A to B.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
If you are designing it so that there isn't more than one way to get from A to B, and if you are training and performance managing your staff, that there is not more than one way to get from A to B. So you are asking for work that, for example, is unnecessarily chunky.
Yep.
I've seen providers ask learners for huge, chunky reports, massive pieces of work that could take months to produce.
Yep.
Right? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Sorry, but why are you allowing the learner several months where they don't get to hand any work in? Excuse me?
Yeah, it doesn't, and that's the thing. That is why the support and planning needs to be in place, because you need to be flexible for each individual
learner. You also
learner.
need to be putting in activity to be forcing the learners to plan that.
Yeah.
So it's looking at, again, that wider work that we're asking the learner to submit. So you've got a report, and it may be for some endpoint assessments, you are preparing them to do a project over 6 months or 6 weeks. That's the activity that they're doing. Okay, so we need to make sure that they're able to do that. But in terms of the evidence that we're asking the learner to submit to us, we need to see evidence of planning. And for those people where planning is a struggle, then how are we teaching them to plan? Where's the learning activity teaching them to plan, supporting them to plan? Where's the feedback on their planning?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's part of the behaviors and the skill that the learners need in order to complete that endpoint assessment. So yeah, design is huge in terms of this
Yeah,
space.
absolutely. Just making it accessible to more people, I think, is absolutely key, and not being afraid to be flexible. That's what I would say. Like, don't isolate people because you're stuck. Training providers in particular, don't isolate your learners because you're stuck on a particular way of doing things. Don't be afraid to be flexible. Where there's a will, there's a way. I massively, believe that. And actually, some of your best learners will come from those ones that you saw huge barriers with in the first place. If you
Oh
just
yeah.
nurture them in the right way, like they will be the people that, absolutely excel, absolutely smash it out of the park and end up coming back to do level fives and so on. So I think
And there's a
remain
lot of planning at level 5, so we need to get those skills in early.
exactly. So give them the skills early on, so then they can move forward with that. And actually, one, you're making their lives easier because you're giving them a new tool and a new skill, and two, you're setting them up for life, really.
Absolutely. And it's also how we have data systems within our business.
Yeah.
I know I keep coming back to this very tediously. But again, and we mentioned this last week, how do we know where the learner is performing and where the learner isn't performing? And how do we objectively know this?
Yep.
Because that's one of the key things that we can use to identify whether or not further intervention is needed. And the
Yeah.
whole point about maximizing learner achievement is knowing when we need to intervene and how we need to intervene. And that comes down to a proper problem diagnosis. So, is it that the issue that the learner's not having work in? For a lot of learners with additional needs, confidence stops them handing the work in. They are convinced it's not going to be good enough, so they self handicap.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so it's how you can wrestle that work out of them. And often it is
Yeah.
physically wrestling. Thank you. I'll
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
looking at that because they are self handicapping. They are absolutely convinced it's not going to be good enough, so there's no point in handing it in.
Yeah.
Well, we need to be able to see that that's happening.
Yeah, and
And
it's important that those tutors then, if those learners are actually seeing our team, it's really important that they speak to our clinicians about that, because actually we can work on the confidence building, the resilience training, we can work on all of that. They're all things that we do on a day-to-day basis with all of our clients. So, and they're really
it's
simple
also just
things.
that thing of how a provider can work with a learner to go, let's get some work coming in.
Yeah, yeah, but
Um,
it's just so important the external supporters also working well with the training providers, so that
absolutely.
it goes hand in hand, and that's a big piece in itself. Those, open lines of communication, making sure everybody's on the same page, not being afraid to say, actually, I really need this, I need you to focus on this area. The learner may not have spoken to you about that, or for the clinicians to say, well, we've spoken about this today, so like after each session, the tutor gets a report that's been written by our clinicians anyway. So they're up to date and very aware of what we've been talking about. So it kind of offers that holistic approach to that learner. The learner knows what they're doing. The tutor knows what that learner is meant to be working towards. So they can support them with that. And then we know what the tutor's wanting the learner to work towards. So we can support with that too. So it's kind of going
Absolutely.
at all
And
angles.
we do have to consider organizational design. Sounded very
Mm-hmm.
posh, didn't it? A lot of providers of apprenticeships, the tutor also does the progress review,
Yeah.
which I've always thought is problematic. There's a couple of reasons why it's problematic. One, actually, I can think of at least three. One, the progress reviews don't add that much value to the tutor's life,
No.
so they don't tend to be done amazingly. If the tutor feels that they're in control of the situation, then there's no great reason to have the conversation. The tutor is often more heavily performance managed in terms of teaching and assessment. So you also find that those reviews may not happen quite so comprehensively on time. The second issue is the learner only has one point of contact, often with a known person.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily know anybody else within the organization as well as they know the tutor. So, what does the learner do when the tutor is part of the problem?
Yeah.
And for a lot of learners with additional needs and a lot of learners, the point of the tutor is to get them to do something that they find difficult, unpleasant, stressful.
Yeah.
So it's not this loving, nurturing, fabulous relationship some of the time. Tutors have to be able to kick butt because that's their job.
Yeah.
And so by having the tutor also being the person that does the progress review, you're making it harder for the learner to have an early stage conversation with somebody around this isn't working for me.
Yeah.
And you're also reducing your options for somebody else to be monitoring what's going on. So you really have to think about your performance management. And part of that, again, is, who else is reading the reports that you guys are writing within
Yeah.
that learning provider to be able to actually go, is what we're doing in-house working to best support this learner? What are we missing? If this learner is not progressing as we would like them to progress, what are we doing wrong?
Yeah, I mean, from my understanding, Julia, it's the SENCO team and the tutor that reads those reports. But I don't know who else do you think would benefit from reading those? I mean, from your experience.
It would depend on who the tutor's line manager is.
Yeah.
One of the biggest issues that I always had in 22 years of running a training provider is when a learner is not progressing as we would like them to do, our job as a provider is to take at least 50% of the blame for that. Yeah. What are we doing wrong? We can only control what we are doing. And if we change what we're doing, we are hoping that the learner changes what they are doing.
Yeah.
So if this learner is not progressing, then what are we changing? In terms of how we're teaching, what we're teaching, how we're assessing, how we're dealing with them. And sometimes you do have to move a learner to another tutor.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so the question again, from an organizational design perspective, is how on it are we that we need to move that learner?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we need to be doing it before crisis stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the key point, I think. So both of the, all of the points we've been discussing today is, try and get to those learners before crisis points, and having tutors that are attuned to that and on board with not being afraid to refer on is absolutely imperative, really, for the tutor themselves, because they're not going to want to lose learners that they've invested time into, but also for those learners. So I think it's a knock-on effect, because it can impact the tutors as much as it can the learners too. And what you don't want is tutors who are burning out with low confidence. So it kind of supports everybody, really. And I think, as you say, taking it back to, the line managers, that is their responsibility as much as it is the tutors, because that goes down to experience and time within the business.
Absolutely. And the SENCOs in a lot of providers are on the same level as the tutors. They are specialist, but if they're at the same level, they can be ignored.
Yeah.
Sadly, we've got to think about, human nature. So what are we doing about making sure that where changes are needed, those changes are happening?
Yeah.
How are we recording everything? You're talking about spotting learners not coping who might make a throwaway comment within things, but we need to be capturing that stuff. So again, when we're reviewing the learner, we can be understanding what's going on. And when I talk about performance management, I mean, it sounds very punitive and miserable, but you can make this really educational. Yeah. This is about staff learning to become more amazing.
Yeah, because that's turning the focus on your internal team as well as
but every day's a learning day.
Absolutely. It progresses your team, and if they feel valued and they feel like you're looking after them and that they're for their best interests, then they are going to work harder as well, which will have a knock-on effect to your learners. So it is very much a holistic. Happy staff, happy team are going to do a better job, higher output, and support the learners.
But if we're paying to have a learner externally supported you know, for me, I'd want to be taking all of that learning that's coming from those reports and making sure that I have the systems in place to be spreading that learning as far and
Yeah.
wide as we possibly can.
Yeah.
Because that makes the whole staff team better.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's
I
not
mean,
just
there
the
are.
learner who learns.
Yeah, I mean there are sessions without I'm not plugging at all, but that we can do with you know the tutors to support them because often they, like I said earlier, they do come across by a lot of vicarious trauma. They're taking a lot of information. They are at risk of burnout. There is, you know, there's a lot of data processing for them to be doing as well as progressing their learners. So there are support out there for them. But like you say, if internally things are in place to support them already, then that's going to be less likely. There's going to be less likely for a need for it. So, you know, I think a lot of it is a knock-on effect. Like if you get that, you know, if you get the planning in a good place and make it look good and streamline for everybody, it's a knock-on positive effect for the learners and for the tutors. So,
Absolutely. And, you know, we're required to do standardization exercises on a regular basis for awarding bodies. And most providers are still delivering some qualification somewhere. But you can actually really use those standardizations to really improve practice across your whole team.
yeah,
Or you can bury the standardizations away in a corner as something boring and tedious and a tick box to make sure that we do.
yeah,
At which point we're probably missing the
yeah,
point, which is how we can support our staff to be more marvelous, which
yeah.
is literally the point.
Yeah, it's all a knock-on effect, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Absolutely. Now, you wanted to plug something very exciting.
I would like to plug something really exciting. So I've recently been in talks with OAL, who are
Yeah,
Endpoint Assessments, Lee Reddington, and we are doing we're jointly hosting a webinar for an hour at 10 a.m. on the 10th of December. We will be talking the importance of supporting learners. We'll be talking, I'll be mentioning a bit about you and Suze, about the work you do at Be Astute, and I will be talking and demoing Spencer, the tool, the profiling tool, and one of our clinicians actually will be coming on and doing at least half an hour
sounds amazing.
of informative chat about the importance of supporting your learners with health and wellbeing. So really excited about that, really excited to be collaborating with those guys and being able to talk about your work and Spencer. So yeah, if anybody wants any more information or the link sending out, please do just give me a shout.
10th of December.
That would be amazing. 10th of December, 10 a.m. Block out your diaries now, please.
It sounds like an amazing thing to do just before Christmas.
I know, but it's our gift to you.
Snowflakes.
Not you personally, but the listeners. But yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe we'll get the team dressed up in Father Christmas hats or something.
Okay.
Christmas judgment policy. But yeah, it should be. We'll try and keep it fun, really informative, and just we just want to support as many people as possible. At the end of the day, we're all about the
That'd be
people.
amazing.
And so OAL. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you everybody for watching. If anything in here resonates, the 10th of December or anything else, please get in touch with us and we would love to chat with you more. Thanks very much, Emma.
Thanks, guys.